Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
I've had guys where they're, about to shoot the biggest buck of their life, and I'll say, don't even load one in. Let's just dry fire on them. Okay, now breathe. Okay, now squeeze. And then the next thing I'll say, okay, let's load one in and do the same thing. A lot of times that's a great bit of advice for people is to, don't do anything fast. If you're shaking, if you're excited, if you're breathing, you're shaking and, excited, just lay there a second, calm down.
That was Jay Scott dropping a huge tip for your next hunting trip. We're going elk hunting today on the Wet Fly Swing podcast. Hey, how's it going today? Thanks for stopping by the show. We've got big giveaways going all this year. You can check out the most recent giveaway at wetflyswing.com/giveaway. Check it out right now and get a chance to win one of our big trips. Today's episode is sponsored by Bear Vault, the perfect solution to keep your provisions secure while heading into the backcountry. Bear Vault keeps wild adventure going strong all year long, whether you're hunting, fishing, hiking, or just taking a stroll in the backcountry. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/bearvault right now. That's BEARVAULT to support this podcast and a great solution to protect your stuff. Jay Scott is here to walk us through the step-by-step to elk hunting. We find out where to get started when choosing a hunt. If you have no idea what to do, how to get started, we talk about that. We also find out how to scout, the best ways to scout before your first trip. If you know where you're going, then how do you scout? And then we dig into a little bit on calls, bullets. We touch on a little bit of everything, just enough to get you started in elk hunting. So without further ado, here you go. Jay Scott from the Jay Scott Outdoors podcast. How's it going, Jay?
It's going great. I'm happy that you had me on. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation.
Yeah, me too. You've got a great podcast in the hunting space, JayScottOutdoors.com. You've got a ton of episodes out there. I'm not sure where you're at now. We'll probably talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to dig into some on elk hunting because that's I think a big struggle for a lot of people. It's a species that a lot of people want to go for, but it's not the easiest one. So, but before we get into all that, talk about how you first got into hunting, and then we'll take into the other stuff.
I was always a kid that growing up, my grandmother on my mother's side would get me Field and Stream magazine, Outdoor Life magazine, and, ages 5, 6, 7, 8, just reading the magazine from cover to cover when it would come in. And, I was the kid that was folding the corner of the pages to, go back and see articles and tips and things. Not really having experienced it yet, but I felt like by reading those magazines, it was building a passion inside of me to want to get out and hunt and fish. And, not too long after, 10, 11, 12, was kind of, always into fishing and still am, just love fishing, to this day. And then I started, being able to hunt with some friends of mine. Their dad would take me and, along with the boys, and just kind of got into it that way and shot my first deer when I was 15, and just really wasn't exposed to it, I would say, when I was really young in getting to go, but by getting to read those magazines and almost just build a vision in my head of what it was going to be like out there, I think created a passion for me that, has allowed me to this day to, just be energized and fired up about hunting and fishing and always having a great season to look forward to, whether it be, elk or Coues Deer or Goulds turkey or, fly fishing in the summer. I spend and have for probably the last 25 years, all over the Western U.S. and, I have 2 different rafts. I'm really into fly fishing. Nice. We spend most of the summers in Colorado, the Roaring Fork Valley, the Vail Valley, and then just going to the Green River, traveling around. So fishing is a big part of my life. Hunting is a big part of my life, and it's just something that I'm still energized today about, just like I was when I was a little kid.
That's a cool breakdown on it and a good way, a good take on it. Yeah, and I didn't realize you're that much into fly fishing. I know your episodes, when you look at it, there's a lot of hunting, right? And obviously hunting is probably a much bigger niche than fly fishing, or maybe even fishing. I'm not sure, but no, this is good. So you've been doing it a lot of your life, most of your life. And have you had along the way ever take a break from it? Sometimes you hear that from people, like they go into college or something, they take a little break. Have you just been going strong the whole time?
Yeah, I'm 49. I'll be 50 next year. And, one of the fortunate things I feel like in my life is that I can basically go from season to season. So, June, July, August, I'm really focused on, fly fishing, moving water, streams and rivers. And then I transition into, September into elk hunting. Then we do desert bighorn sheep. So I'm a guide and outfitter as well. And we do desert bighorn sheep hunts. Then we do our Mexico Coues Deer hunts in January. Then we have a little bit of break there in February and March, and then right back at it. Do Goulds turkey hunts down in Mexico. This will be my 27th season doing Coues Deer hunts in Mexico. It'll be my 13th season doing Goulds turkey in the spring. And then once those spring turkey hunts are over with, I jump right back into fishing. So, like this year, I've been to the Henry's Fork, been to the Green River several times, and then fish, we stay right here in the Roaring Fork Valley all summer and, fish the Roaring Fork and the Colorado and the Gunnison and the Eagle and all of that. So to answer your question, I feel like if I had to elk hunt 12 months out of the year, or if I had to fly fish, 12 months out of the year and not have those different seasons and different, where I can just put the fly rods down and focus solely on elk for 30 days and then, put the bugle down and then focus solely on scouting for bighorn sheep, it might get a little bit monotonous. So, I feel like if people could kind of categorize whether they're into fly fishing or hunting, if you can kind of focus on those different seasons, it allows you to be fresh for each season and keep that passion and moving forward so you don't burn out, because burnout's a real thing. And, I'm kind of an all-in type of guy. And, I could see myself, guys say, man, wouldn't it be great if turkeys gobbled all year long? Or wouldn't it be great if elk bugled all year long? And it's like, well, if they did, you would kind of get used to it and it would kind of be old news. Since the elk only bugle basically 30 days, 1 month out of the year, it's easy to be all in for that month and then, move on to something else.
Yeah, no, you're right. And fish species kind of can be that way too, some of them, right? I mean, trout is a little bit different. It seems like trout in some places you can fish all year, a little bit different. But no, this is great. I think, looking at this for you, I'm always interested because, you have this podcast, right? J. Scott Outdoors, and you do a bunch of stuff there. I'm curious how that came to be, because I know podcasting is definitely not an easy thing to do. How did that idea come, and when did that start up for you?
Yeah, so in January of 2015, I had just got back from my Coues Deer hunts in Mexico and usually spend about 30 days down there. We take over 100 people a year down there hunting for Coues Deer. And Giannis Patelis and Steve Rinella of the Meat Eater, they've hunted with me, I think, 7 years. I think this will be their 8th year. And when I got back, they said, Jay, we just recorded a podcast episode. Curious if you would listen to it and tell us what you think. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Meat Eater, but so they sent me the pilot episode. I was like, what's a podcast? And they sent it to me and I listened to it and it was fantastic. And, I sent them a message back and I said, man, this is really cool. And they said, yeah, Joe Rogan they were palling around with Joe Rogan quite a bit then. And he had started his podcast and they said, Joe thinks this is going to be the next big thing. And so Giannis was like, Jay, why don't you start a Western hunting and fishing podcast? You love to talk about that kind of stuff. So literally I said, well, what equipment do I need? What gear do I need? And 2 weeks later, I was actually up and running. And I think I'm 815 episodes or something into it. And it's just been a huge blessing for me because I, get to have some great guests on the podcast and get to learn, a lot of stuff about a lot of things that I didn't know about. And so I get to learn every episode. I feel like I'm pretty good at asking questions and kind of diving in there and kind of picking things out. And, my podcast, we focus a lot on strategy. We focus a lot on tactics. Whether it's elk hunting, Coues Deer hunting, sheep hunting, fishing, whatever it may be. I love to kind of get down in the weeds, if you will, and talk about, how fast you strip your streamers, or on sunny days, what colors you use, and, darker days, what color, how do you swing it, different things, with the hunting, talking about, spring turkey tactics and, how to roost turkeys and elk calling. And we really dive in. I get some of the best elk callers in the country on and talking about their strategy for calling in bulls. And so anyway, it's something that I've talked about for a long time. It's my wife kind of says, it's no different than hearing me on the phone talking to my buddies.
That's right.
Kind of like how I, like to go about it, to keep it, real conversational. And, for a long time I was doing 2 episodes a week, which is a lot, as you know, Dave.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time. I'm a one-man band, from locating guests and getting them to get on the podcast, to recording the podcast, to editing the podcast, to, uploading, and then, doing the marketing for the podcast. When I started really in 15, when I would ask a guest to come on, literally their response was like mine. Well, what's a podcast? This sounds kind of hokey. I mean, at the time it was like, it'll just be like a conversation. And they're like, Jay, this sounds kind of weird.
Yeah.
And now, as podcasts are very, prevalent all over the world. And, I think one thing that really helped podcasters out is the fact that, people could listen on their mobile devices. I think podcasting had been around for a long time, but they hadn't really figured out how to listen mobily. And now with, Apple Podcasts and, Spotify, all the different, platforms where you can just, put your headphones in and listen, whether you're driving or walking or, walking the dog or hiking or whatever. So it's been really fun to kind of see how podcasters originally were kind of looked at as these guys, these creepy guys in the basement or something. And now it's, pretty much an accepted way of life, and people really get their information from podcasts.
I agree. 100%. I think that's it's unique. It's a little bit different than a YouTube video, because YouTube, you got to kind of watch it, and, blogs, you got to read it. And I mean, audio is just so easy, and then you can download it. And I hear from people, occasionally they'll be like, man, we download the episode, they're on the river in some remote canyon listening to an episode of the podcast, right? And that's, or same for you, right? There's like bugling. I can imagine people have listened to yours and had your bugle episode, right? And they're trying to learn how to bugle out in the woods. It's pretty amazing. It's always there, and it's evergreen too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing way to communicate with people. One of the funner podcast episodes that I did was a couple years back. I actually took my equipment and got in a drift boat with my buddy Colby Crosland at Spinnerfall Guide Service on the Green River. And I brought a buddy with me that fishes with me a lot. He's in his 70s, MJ Mastelier, and we actually were all mic'd up, all 3 of us. So it was pretty cool to basically go on a guided trip with Colby being, just the master guide there at the Green River. And we talked about fishing, but, he'd be like, right there, Jay, there's a seam right there, hit that pocket. Okay, you missed it, or, there's a nice spot coming up, Jay, hit that spot. Okay. And I still, to this day, I mean, that's been 3 or 4 years. I get a lot of feedback how they loved the live kind of atmosphere of it. And we were fishing and talking and telling stories and, catching fish. And it was a really neat episode for sure.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, and I love that you you noted the meat eater and Rogan too. I mean, because Joe has done a ton for podcasting, and obviously, I mean, there's
Oh,
money in
he's
it now.
paved the way.
Yeah, he's paved the way, right? I mean, he sold his podcast for like $100 million, and it's like, wow, okay, now that's legit. That's some real money. But and then the meat eater, they're pretty much killing it as well. When you look at your show and you look at the meat eater, for those that wouldn't know, I mean, how do you see your show as different from what the meat eater does?
It's totally different. The way I look at their podcast is, Steve is a personality in his own. He can carry any, I've been friends with him for a long time. You have dinner with him, he can just really carry a room, and he is a, very dynamic personality. They have a lot of fun on their podcast, and there's this, they do have. Mine's more educational and informational. I would say mine's a little bit deeper into tactics and strategies and how-tos and whys, whereas it seems they kind of broad stroke and not taking, obviously their podcast is one of the most popular in the country. It's just totally different. There's a lot of joking and laughing and, a lot of fun. Not that mine isn't, but it's just totally different style. Mine is more really digging deep in the weeds of how to do certain things, why you're doing certain things at certain times. Being an outfitter and a guide for, 25 plus years, it really helps, I think, people to know what they're getting into and know what to expect when they go on certain trips, and, whether it be fishing or hunting, and really dive into the mechanics of what we do and how we do it. So, it's totally different, I would say. Those guys do a phenomenal job. I would say mine is way less entertaining, but way more, how to do things.
Yeah, I think it's entertaining. That's the cool thing. It's entertaining in a different way. And I always say, the 3 E's, right? It's like entertain, educate, or emotion, right? And you got those 3 things on a podcast. And if you could hit, at least you got to hit at least one of them. If you hit 2 of them, you're doing pretty well. If you hit 3 of them, it's like you knock it out of the park, right? And
sure.
I think that you probably, I'm sure, do that on some of your shows where you're knocking all 3 out. But that's a perfect segue into what we're going to get into here today with the elk hunting, because we do a lot of the, step by step and getting into some of the deep dive as well. And I'm hoping today to dig into elk hunting, because I know for me and a lot of people out there, it's one of those, hunts and species that you're just like, oh man, it would be great to get a big elk. And, I've had a chance to get a couple of nice elk over the years, but I want to take it to, like, somebody's listening here. Maybe they are in the Midwest, maybe they're on some place in the country and they want to get into elk hunting, and they're, say, going to, a state that has elk. Where do you tell, what's the first starting point? Because, I mean, you've got the out-of-state stuff, and then you've got people in their own state, but what's the first word of advice if somebody says, man, I really want to get into elk hunting? What's your advice?
So if you really want to get into elk hunting, there's several ways you can do it. You can chase some of the over-the-counter hunts. Colorado jumps out, in the forefront of over-the-counter, where you don't have to get drawn. You can just come buy a tag and go elk hunting. Then there's the draw tags where, across the western states, whether it's Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, there's draw tags where you can actually apply. And for every year I'm going to kind of simplify this, for every year that you don't draw a tag, you get what's called a bonus point or a preference point, depending on which state. Unfortunately, what's happened is we have a limited supply of elk and a limited supply of elk tags. So that's why the draw is required. But it's also a good thing, because if every state was over the counter, we would probably not have near the elk that we do have. So one of the challenges is, there's over the counter elk hunting in several states, but the quality of elk hunting in over-the-counter states and over-the-counter units, sometimes the elk are very hard to find, sometimes they're very skittish, sometimes it's difficult. There's also another avenue other than over-the-counter tags and draw tags, and that's where you can either A, purchase a landowner tag, or B, there are some reservations, Indian reservations all across the country in different states, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Montana, as well as private land where you can purchase and buy a tag. So just like most everything else in these days and times, the price of those tags, usually ranges, and it's just going up by the day, from the low end of say 7,500 all the way up to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per hunt. And that is because of the limited supply of availability of animals to hunt. Quality, not only quality animals, quality experience. So, to recap, you've got your over-the-counter tags where you just basically come pay, depending on the state, anywhere from say $500 to $1,000, and that gets you a tag, and you can just go hunting. And there's certain areas where it's just wide open, national forest, and you hike in, pack in, whatever. Then you've got your draw tags where there's areas within a state and units and boundaries within a state they limit the number, say where the over-the-counter unit next door would have, in a season, they'll have 2,200 people hunting it. Maybe the unit next door is a draw unit, and maybe there'll only be 150 tags. The challenge with the draw system is a lot of times in some of these states, it's taking anywhere from 15 to 25 years to draw those tags. Wow. Just to get a tag, because of the lack of supply. Then you take the third element, what I was talking about, where you can buy a tag, and whether it be private land tags, landowner tags, people that have big chunks of private property that either get their tags through a landowner system. You can buy tags, and then you also have Indian reservations that also get their own tags, and you can they sell their tags, and you can get them that way. So the entry into elk hunting is a little more challenging than, say, deer across the U.S. Deer are pretty much readily available. There's a lot of states where you can just buy a tag and go hunting. Elk isn't quite that way. And, the reality of it is I don't see elk hunting getting cheaper. I just see it, continuing to get more expensive. But it is, they are an awesome animal. I will point out too that, if you want to archery hunt elk, sometimes those tags are much harder to get than if, say, you hunt some of these later seasons when they're not bugling, some of these third and fourth seasons, and they're not bugling, and you're hunting them more like a deer rather than, hearing them bugle and, getting to interact with them. Those tags can be a lot easier to find and purchase. And then there's also antlerless tags, cow elk tags, and those are much more readily available. And, really for the people that really want to hunt just strictly for, getting food on the table, antlerless is a great way to go because in most states, those tags are pretty easy to get. Not near as complicated, and you don't have to wait as long for the bull tags. So, I don't want to paint a picture that there's not opportunity out there, because there absolutely is. But I also want to let people know that, if you're getting into the elk hunting game, there's several ways to go. But you need to know that they are highly sought after, and, you're either going to have to put in for all the states and hope you get, lucky in the draws, go over the counter, or get your checkbook out and pay for some quality hunting on private land.
That's what it sounds like, and that's a good breakdown. To me, it sounds like, the over-the-counter is just going to be kind of a crazy, kind of a zoo out there. The drawing the tags, if you're doing that, then you probably want to just draw on everywhere, and then hopefully over time, you don't have to wait 15 years to get one. And then, but that's, it's all research. You got to dig into then the landowner reservations. It's pay to play, so you got to have some money. And $50,000. That's definitely upper level stuff. which makes it challenging.
Kind of rules most people out for sure. But I mean, there's a lot of hunts that, you can get in that 12, let's say 10 to 15 range and have, unbelievable, quality experiences. And, it's no different than, say, a good fishing trip. You can do the DIY and go out to the Green River or go red fishing in Louisiana. But then you can pay for a guide and, guides these days. Float trips on most Western rivers these days are, 650, 700 a day, some 750 a day per boat. And I've been wanting to go red fishing or black drum fishing in Louisiana, and most of those boats are at least 1,000 a day. It's just the nature of what we do.
Yeah, it's comparable. And even the bigger, like a trip up to Alaska or wherever, Belize, you're going to pay whatever, 5,000, 10,000, and 15,000 or more. So when you do these hunts, how would that work? So if you typically get a guide, say you want to spend, can you spend, say, 10,000 and find a good hunting guide to go on an elk trip, or do you have to kind of pay the 10,000 then also with the tag?
No, for 10, you can find a nice piece of private ground and a guide and lodging and food and all of that included. Absolutely.
So that'd be one route definitely to go if you want to bypass. But again, I think elk hunting, the way I got into elk hunting, it was through my family, and it was always like an annual thing. Like even when the numbers weren't great, and the hunting wasn't the best, it was still like, okay, we're out there elk hunting. We're at elk camp. We're doing it. It's in the snow. It's great. But I slowly got out of it because the area we hunted, it wasn't as good, and it just kind of guys got older. And now I'm kind of looking back at it like, it'd be cool to get this going again. And I think that, like you said, you gave a couple of good ways to do it, and it's probably just doing a lot of research. Where would you recommend to get research? Let's say, somebody wants to start looking around all these Western states. Is there like one site that like breaks down how to do it, how to dig into it all?
Yeah, I think sites like gohunt.com, you can go on there and it basically has the draw odds for all of the Western states. And that's, for elk, deer, all, sheep, all of the big game animals. You can basically go on there. You can become what's called an insider member. And you can sign up, and that gets you access to maps. They have maps similar to, if you're familiar with like OnX Maps, they have a real similar mapping program. It's actually very, very similar to that. Has a lot of great mapping qualities, as well as you get these strategy articles, from their team on each state and where to apply, how to apply. They give you reminders, so you get emails that say, "Hey, don't miss the draw in Montana. Hey, the Wyoming draw is coming up." And then they give a lot of over-the-counter research where you can, within their mapping program, within the insider program, you can actually get on there and you can filter out whether you want to do archery, whether you want to do muzzleloader, early rifle, late rifle. And it gives you the breakdown of success rates, harvest rates, all that kind of stuff. That's probably one of the best resources out there.
And do you do a little bit of everything? What's your, like, hunting wise, are you kind of equal archery and rifle, or how's that look?
So my personal hunting, because I'm an outfitter and a guide, I've done a lot of hunting myself, but my personal hunting has kind of taken a back seat. With all of the, I like to make people happy and put them on great quality hunts. And my personal hunting kind of takes a back seat, and I'm fortunate because I get to go on all the hunts and be right there in the middle of all of it. Pulling the trigger myself has kind of taken a back seat, and I'm more passionate about helping someone come and enjoy the experience like I've done, and so yes, I do hunt myself, but not near as much as I used to, say 15, 20 years ago.
Okay. And so if I was going to call you up, track you down and say, hey, I'd love to do a trip. What sort of trip would you recommend? What would that look like if I was going to try to get on with you? Is that possible in the near future or down the line?
Yeah. I mean, I do so many trips. So I do the Coues Deer in Mexico. This will be my 27th season doing Coues Deer hunts. The Coues Deer are an amazing animal. They're only found in southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, and northern Mexico, mostly Sonora and Chihuahua. They're a cousin of a Midwest or an Eastern whitetail, but they're much smaller. Their body size is probably 100 to 110 pounds. Whereas, the Midwest or Eastern deer, can weigh up to, 250, 300 pounds. So they're a much smaller bodied animal, but they live in just some unbelievable mountainous desert terrain, beautiful, beautiful country, terrain that they live in. So, you could go on a Coues Deer hunt. I also do Goulds turkey hunts. Goulds are, there's 5 subspecies of turkeys. Goulds is one that a lot of times when people go after the Goulds turkey, it's the 5th of the subspecies. There's actually an ocellated turkey. We don't do those in down by Campeche, Mexico. But the Goulds turkey, it's the biggest of the subspecies. We've been doing those now for 12 seasons. This will be my 13th season this spring. We do those in northern Chihuahua and northern Sonora. For those turkey hunters out there, Goulds turkeys are amazing. They have a big white band on their tail feathers. They're just absolutely beautiful turkeys. And then, I have desert bighorn sheep hunts in Arizona. We do those in the month of December. That's a real big passion of mine. And then elk hunting. I was a guide in Arizona on public land for 20 years. Then I spent 5 years starting in 2017. I was asked to be a hunt manager at a private ranch in Colorado at the OT6 ranch. And I actually transitioned this summer. I'm headed to another ranch in Montana, a very iconic ranch in Montana, and going to be working up there. But if people want to reach out, I can certainly help them on an elk hunt. I have lots of friends in all of the different states, and can help them find a hunt, whether it's a hunt for whatever price point they're looking at. I can kind of help them with that. And like we said, the Go Hunt Insider is a great way if people want to do their own research on over-the-counter units and draw units across the West as well.
There you go. And all these other species sound amazing too, turkey, deer, bighorn. I mean, these are all just iconic, like something any hunter would probably love to go after. But let's dig in just a touch on elk, because I want to talk about the hunting a little bit. And we're not going to go deep. If people want to go deep on elk, they can go to your podcast and search, I'm sure, many of the elk hunting episodes, and you can dig into it. But, I'm just curious. So let's imagine we get a tag, say it's in, Colorado or just wherever, one of the Western states, and we're heading there. What's that first step you do in preparation? If you are kind of doing the DIY thing, what would you recommend for somebody to kind of get started before you get into the hunt, like to get prepared for it?
Yeah, I think there's several things. One of the things is you got to get your body really in shape. These elk live at high elevation most of the time, anywhere from say, 5,000 up to obviously, 12, 13,000 feet. But, the bread and butter is, that 7, 8, 9, 10,000 foot level. So, a lot of guys coming from, say, the middle of our country, the Midwest or the East, where they're not used to elevation, you have to be able to acclimate to the elevation, and that's one thing. But you also have get your legs good and strong, get your lungs strong, and try and do as much hiking, try and do as much Stairmaster, treadmill, all of that kind of stuff to get your body in shape, because it is a physical hunt. You do have to do, quite a bit of hiking. I would say, at least a couple miles a day, if not, up to say, 8 to 10 miles a day in some cases. And some of it's pretty vertical, terrain. So get your body acclimated and get your body ready. And then a lot of the scouting I would recommend would be beforehand, get maps of your unit. get, like I talked about, the Go Hunt maps or the OnX maps, so that you know the boundaries of your unit, and then break it down and whatever area you're going to hunt, know the trail systems, know the trail heads, know that access points, the ingress and egress access points where you can get into the country, because half the battle is being able to navigate around in the country within the terrain and get in and get out the easiest ways. So I like to really study. Google Earth Maps, or also get in there and plot the trails out. A lot of these mapping programs, you can they have them on there, and then you can kind of plot, okay, this is where I'm going to camp, or I'm if you're going to camp at a trailhead, you have access to several different ways in and out. And then also within the units, break down different areas, because say you get there a couple days before the hunt and there's 25 camps and vehicles at your trailhead. Well, that's probably going to mean you're going to have quite a bit of pressure and other people around. So you want to have kind of plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, so that if you're thrown a curveball, and have too much pressure, that you can move around and find kind of a sweet spot for you to find some animals.
That's great. And is pressure, when you talk about pressure, is it can that be a good thing when you're out there elk hunting? And how would you use pressure to your advantage?
Yeah, I mean, so there's been a lot of talk about, guys packing in miles and miles into the backcountry and actually creating more pressure way in the backcountry, and sometimes pushing those elk actually back closer to the, the trailheads or the highways, and that happens sometimes. One thing I would say is, if you can get out in the summer and get to your area that you're going to, and, take your tent, take all your backpacking gear, and hike around and kind of assess the country and compare it to what you looked at on your mapping devices, and kind of be like, well, that ridge is a lot bigger than what I thought, or this glassing point doesn't quite see as much country as I want to see, or this terrain is thicker, or the trail is way too easy and it's too close to the trailhead, and I know people are just going to pound that. That's where summer scouting can really pay off, and spending time in that area. You're looking for sign, you're looking for tracks, you're looking for rubs from the prior year. You're trying to spot elk. Preparation is huge. And then as you get into it, Dave, just like fishing, I mean, you kind of start to learn areas, you learn where people go, you learn where people don't go. And there's so much to it of like, well, yeah, there's 6, trucks at the trailhead, but they all go in 1.5 miles. But if I can just push in and go 4 miles, maybe they don't go that far. Or you notice that, hey, everybody pushes into this, certain 3-mile point, but they walk right by, within 1 mile of the trailhead. You can branch off and go to these different canyons and ridges, and they walk right by them. And a lot of that comes with experience of hunting, and as you hunt a unit more and more, you'll get to learn more and more.
And when you're out there, so let's say we find a good spot, you've kind of done a little bit of research, you're out there. This probably varies depending on where you're at, but are you doing a lot more kind of sitting, hunting? Are you kind of hiking? What's that look like for elk? Is there a bunch of diverse ways to do it?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a caller. I like to call a lot and call and interact with the elk, especially in September when they're bugling. But I also like to glass a lot with high-powered binoculars and spotting scopes. And over the years I've done it so much, I try and focus on older age class, more mature animals, bigger animals. And so a lot of times, if I can weed out a bunch of animals by looking at them a long ways with my binoculars, and then find the one that I'm looking for, and then make an efficient, strategic plan to go in there and make a good, efficient stalk on them. That's kind of what I'm looking for. A lot of people just kind of willy-nilly just chase bugles, and that's fun. And that's a great way to have fun, and it's a great way to get an elk. But kind of as you graduate and harvest more animals and get more experienced, most of the guys I know like to harvest more of the mature animals, the older animals, and sometimes that takes the most efficient way to do that, if your unit will allow, as far as terrain, is to spot the good one, weed through 10 or 15 of the ones that are younger and smaller bulls, spot the big one that you want to go after, and then go after that one. You only have so much time during a hunt, and if you waste it, playing with smaller bulls, a lot of times you'll never get the bigger one. Now, some people listening are like, I just want to get a bull. I don't care what it is.
Right.
And that's great. That's perfectly fine. I would say a good strategy then would be to become proficient at calling and understanding, their behavior and how they work. Shout out to a buddy of mine, Chris Roe Hunting Resources. He's got a great website and platform that basically talks about elk behavior, vocalizations, understanding what vocalizations, what they mean, when to use them, a whole bunch of strategy, and kind of dive in deep on elk behavior. I recommend checking his stuff out, Roe Hunting Resources, ROE. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's just getting out there, spending time and understanding, trying to learn what these elk are doing. It's no different than like going to a new river and not having been there, and trying to figure out when the fish, are they eating emergers, are they eating nymphs? Okay, I'm starting to see some bugs come off. What are those bugs? Okay, I noticed that there's bugs coming off, there's bugs on the surface, but the trout aren't, they're not rising. And then, I realize, I see their tails, and they're kind of suspended. Oh, they're eating emergers. Okay, so they're not eating the dries yet. And then all of a sudden it transitions into, okay, now I'm seeing rise forms and they're actually eating the dries. It's elk hunting's no different. There's kind of just a little bit of getting out there and observing some of that stuff yourself.
What is the comparable, to bugling? Because bugling does seem like, a challenge. It may be a challenge for a lot of people, but what's the analogy in fly fishing? What's as difficult as bugling, learning to bugle in fly fishing?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's kind of maybe a hard one. I don't know if there's anything. Because is bugling, I mean, how hard is that to pick up? You haven't done any of it, and you want to get out elk hunting this year. How much of a chance do you have to get ready for that?
Oh, I mean, everybody's different. I mean, some people have that real musical ear where they can hear, whether it's, there's so much great stuff out there on Instagram and YouTube of normal everyday bulls bugling and cow elk, talking to, listening to some of these great callers and trying to mimic some of their sounds. I would recommend, trying to mimic the elk themselves, and then listen to how some of these great callers actually use their call to sound like that. I feel like if we try and sound like the human, we're kind of doing it backwards. I think we should try and always sound like the elk themselves. And the more natural sounds you can make, the more, the closer imitation that you can be, just like a fly pattern. If your size, if you're using a size 16 and the fish are keyed in on a size 18, you may catch a few fish, but you're not going to really nail it. When you nail the size and color and exact representation, that's when you're going to have more success. There's kind of that parallel with fly fishing. In fly fishing, that's why I pay so much attention to the bugs themselves. What's on the surface, what's under the surface, what are the fish doing, what time are the fish, and it's the same with elk. Like, you ask, how hard is it to just pick up a bugle? Well, there's people that I have known that have never, blown an elk call in their life, and within a day or two, they've actually sound pretty good. And honestly, there's guys that have been doing it for 20 years that still sound horrible. So, right. I think a lot of it is natural talent, and I think a lot of it is also having the ability to make your sounds and have someone kind of assess, hey, how does this sound? So if you're fortunate to have a buddy that knows elk pretty well and can be like, well, you're really good on this part, but this part needs some work. I think it's always good to have someone be able to break down and not knocking on you, but give you some constructive criticism so that you can get better. And then there's nothing that replaces actually getting out there and interacting and blowing your call. And well, the elk really like when I make that sound, so I need to do that more in that situation. Or I blew that sound and everything went quiet and they shut up and they left. Maybe not do that again.
Yeah, there you go. And you mentioned the Roe Hunting is a good site that you can get some information on the calling and all different techniques and things like that.
Yeah, Roe Hunting Resources. It's a great place. He basically goes over all of the cow elk vocalizations, all of the bull elk vocalizations, what they mean, how they sound. He has, elk actually doing the sounds themselves, and then he kind of breaks it down and talks about it. And it's really will shorten your learning curve on, when to call, how to call, and what to sound like.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fishhound Expeditions, putting together remote Alaskan wilderness trips for that next trip of a lifetime. This is not your lodge-style trip. This is your remote float down the river, hanging out with all the animals, camping, just having a good time on the river. Basically, this is the extreme river trip. And Fishhound's got it covered. Mousing, chasing salmon, camping, good drinks, good food. It's all there. And as we've heard before, life is short, so it's time. If you've been thinking about Alaska, this is the trip for you. In a recent episode, Adam shared how he created Fishhound after a lifelong passion and goal to be an outfitter. And I'd say Adam has pretty much knocked it out of the park on this one. If you heard that episode, you can hear the passion and the great trip he's got going. We're heading up there later this summer, and we're doing a giveaway also for this trip. So if you want to get involved in that, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/fishhound to find out more and to connect with your next amazing Alaskan trip. That's wetflyswing.com/fishhound, FISHHOUND. Okay, back to the show. So the terrain with elk, it sounds like there's probably diversity there too, whether you're hunting a thick forest versus a desert, right? Plains or something like that. What's it look like for you, or what type of habitat are you typically hunting for elk?
I would say mostly like, ponderosa pine country, stuff that you would find in that, 7 to 10,000 feet. It depends on the state too. Arizona's terrain, I guided in Arizona for 20 years on public land for elk, and it really is different than, say, some of the high country of Colorado.
Is that like desert?
It's not desert, but there's a lot of sagebrush.
So you're shooting, or you're looking way out and sometimes taking long shots on elk out there?
Yeah, it can be. You also have a lot of pinyon juniper, what people call like cedars, pinyon juniper, shaggy bark juniper, where, your trees are, not near as tall as, say, ponderosa, but you get kind of these rolling, not necessarily big ridges and big mountains, but more just kind of rolling terrain. It's thick, it's hard to glass. Those areas can be good when, the calling is good. You can get in there and kind of sneak up, and they can be just on the other side of the tree and they can't see you, but you can hear them. And so that terrain is sometimes fun to hunt. You get ponderosa pine where, ponderosa pines, the size of the tree vary, but you can kind of see in a linear or horizontal, 100 yards or 150 yards, and so can they. So sometimes that's hard to sneak in there on elk when, you don't have that cover where you can move as they're bugling in those ponderosa thickets. Sometimes it's tough because, you can see because, the branches don't really start till above your head. And so, they're walking, you can see them, they can see you. Sometimes it's a little more challenging to hunt in that kind of terrain. And then, you get aspens in, Utah and Colorado. And sometimes those aspen groves can be fun to hunt in, can be thick at times, but run parallel with what you think about when you think about September elk hunting. The aspen trees are beautiful.
And if I was, coming into your podcast, let's just take it there. We were talking just briefly a little elk here. Where do you direct? Because you've got 800 episodes, right? All these episodes. If somebody comes to your site or your podcast, how would they get a step-by-step to learn more about elk from your site? What would you recommend?
One of the challenges, I get this a lot. Jay, I want to come and just learn about Coues, or Jay, I want to just learn about your elk episodes. I have yet to find a categorical, platform that actually can help me categorize. So unfortunately, you would just have to either scroll back or scroll forwards and just go to the episodes that are on elk. And any of the ones that are on elk, I'll have elk in the title. And, there's probably 100 episodes on elk at least. And just listen to them, talking to a lot of the best outfitters and guides, elk callers, in the world. And much like your podcast, I was listening to an episode last night with Mike Lawson on the Green.
Oh, yeah.
Green River. You're taking, whether it be geographic areas, whether it be rivers, whether it be certain, brown trout, rainbow trout, whatever it may be. Awesome. I just started the episode with Mike Lawson, but, having fished the Henry's Fork, he's someone that, he's an icon. He's been there, born and raised. That's his, he still lives on the same river that he grew up fishing as a kid. It's just, you can get so much information from podcasts, especially when you start, diving specifically into, that area.
You answered my own question right there, and that's how I do it too. Yeah, I try to, there's sometimes you kind of go a little broad, but sometimes, just like the states, I'm doing this little thing where it's kind of like, I just did one last week where it was like fly fishing Virginia. You know what I mean? Like there's 50 states and it's hard to be a general, but I'm trying to have some general episodes where somebody can go there and get a broad spectrum on each state. But then I'm also digging into, there's these rivers, there's these species. Specifically, I might have a targeted episode just on, topwater bass flies for smallmouth, something like that, right? And you're the same way. You just go into it each episode and you have a guest and you maybe look at their specialty and dig into it.
Yeah, we may be specifically talking about wallows, where elk come to, lay down and roll around, or we might be talking about elk rubs and what makes an elk rub and why do they do it, and all of the things with elk rubs. Or we might talk about bugling specific young bulls versus sounding like older bulls, or we may be talking about shot placement for archers, and some of the different diving into when you hit a bull in a certain spot, your recovery rate, and it's better to hit them here than there, and and then a lot of strategies of like how to actually call a bull when a bull doesn't answer back. What do you do when a bull's bugling his guts out? What do you do? When you have 4 or 5 bulls bugling, which one do you choose to go after first? So a lot of what I do is the same thing, pick a specific topic. And then sometimes it's just get a guest on and talk to them in general, all about elk hunting or all about Coues deer hunting or, sheep hunting or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and it's good. I think like today is a good example. I was kind of thinking about digging, trying to deep dive into elk, but realizing that it's so deep, you know what I mean, that you can't even almost do it justice. So it's more, I think, going to be kind of a broader episode, which is great because I think it's more even providing resources. So now we have a couple more resources to dig into. I want to turn a little bit and have a few other questions I wanted to ask you. Some are related to elk, some are some other things. And gear is another big one, right? I mean, obviously rifle, it's like the fly rod. You gotta have the right tool for the job. With elk hunting, I mean, how many are there? Just a bunch of great rifles, rounds for elk hunting. What do you think is a real good round for elk?
I get asked this question a lot, and I would say, a 270's probably killed more elk than any rifle out there. And people, that's kind of the response is, oh wow. But for a long time, a 270 was just basically your all around. Same with like a 30-06.
What about a 308?
308s, that's been a great sniper rifle for a long time. It's a slower, a slower round, but it's very, very accurate. Some of the most accurate snipers in the world have used 308s forever. But, I would say with all of the technology these days, the 300 caliber rifle, if you can stay in that 300 caliber, range, I think you're probably going to be best off for elk. Elk are a big animal. You need to have a good bullet that is going to have plenty of knockdown power. But in general, if you stick with that 300 caliber, and there's so many different, within the 300 caliber, but if you stick with that, I think that's probably going to be your best all-around elk cartridge.
That's it. Okay, and what about, and changing it here a little bit, like for deer, if you're deer hunting and say it's for maybe your kid or even your wife or something like that, what's a good rifle? Is that still the same? I mean, still the same, the 270 or 30-06?
No, I would say you can go down to, the old standby was, the old 243s for women and children. They've killed a lot of deer. But, a great caliber now is like that 6.5 PRC or 6.5 Creedmoor. Kids can shoot them, women can shoot them. They have very little recoil. It's a great caliber. The 257 Weatherby. 25-06, just a smaller, that when you're getting women and children involved in rifle shooting, I think the worst thing you could do is shoot the big calibers, that kick a lot and or that make a ton of noise, because you start getting, right off the bat, get flinching. If you're getting a kid into it, start with the 22 and just do a lot of 22 shooting, and then maybe go up to the 22 250 or 223 or something like that, and then it will be nothing for them to transition up to a 6.5. But the last thing you want to do is start out someone that's never shot with a 300 caliber.
Yeah, 7 mm Magnum or something like that.
Yeah, I mean they're very loud. They kick. Like, that's not. You kind of want to go the opposite way and start them where it doesn't kick. It's not that loud. It's not much of a shock to your system to pull the trigger and shoot.
Is there still a like the bullet shortage? Are you still seeing that out there? Is that a thing that's going on?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. It's the supply is demand is very high, but supply is very, very limited. And so, yeah, that's the thing that people need to understand, whether you're elk hunting or deer hunting this fall. Make sure you've got your bullets now, because good chance every day that goes by, there's going to be less of them for sure.
That's it. So that's pretty much, that's the tip there, is just get them as soon as you can. Just get them ahead so you have them way ahead.
Yeah, and buy them and have plenty of supply for next year as well, because it's amazing how the lack of supply, it's just created a giant shortage out there for sure.
Good. Okay. And on your podcast, and you might not even know this, with 800. Well, first of all, in the 800 episodes, so you were doing 2 for a while. I mean, what's your cadence look like now? What do you do there?
To be honest with you, this summer I've taken a little bit of a breather, and I kind of go through periods where I did, 8 or 10 in June. I haven't done that many in July. I'm about to kick off some here in August as hunting season gets closer. But since 2015, being 7 years into it, I was just doing 2 episodes a week, just got to be so much. I've, gotten busy with lots of other things. My cadence isn't quite as good as it was.
Yeah. So you're still going, but you typically, if somebody was going to subscribe right now to your episode, they'd probably be seeing a new episode here, potentially the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to be releasing a bunch here in August, and there's plenty that they can go back through 815 episodes, and over the last 7 seasons, and from every topic involved in hunting and a bunch in fishing as well.
What do you think? Do you have any episode? Do you have one that's just like your biggest, or do you have any that are just always resonate well with people?
I mean, that's kind of a
tough one.
I guess it just depends on what you're looking for.
Who is your best, because you had the meat eater, you've had some people, you had, I think you had Donald Trump Jr. I mean, some of those episodes that you have, do you see a big blast of, when you have a big guest like that on?
Yeah, but to be honest with you, this kind of sounds weird. I really don't pay much attention to the stats, or I judge my podcast based on feedback that I get through my Instagram account or through my emails. I've never really been one to focus too much on the numbers and popularity. I've never really, I never started doing my podcast to try and make money or monetize it. That's not the reason that I started it. Although I would say after 5 episodes, I, had sponsors come. This was back when it was just starting. Podcasts were new, and so I've been very, very fortunate with the podcast sponsors that I have, and most of them have been with me the entire time, and it's been a really good run. But I've tried to kind of stay away from, my personality is not much to have. How do I get into this? Yeah. So I feel like there's people that do podcasts and they're trying to do the shock and awe. They're trying to, whatever the hot button of the week is, and try and do stuff for popularity and to try and get listeners and to build a listenership and try and do controversial subjects. And that's just never really been my style. I would rather just talk about details and try and help people to be better at what they do, rather than focus on trying to be popular, trying to be, the latest and greatest, and in the forefront, in the eye, and try and. It's just not really my style.
Yeah, I love that. No, I agree. I think it's and that's just the social media world we're in, right? You see some of this stuff out there, it's just kind of crazy, and you're like, oh yeah.
I really try and focus on information and education and trying to help people become better. And Bill Winke, he's was started MidwestWhitetail.com. He's a good friend of mine. Been friends with him for years. He's one of the biggest outdoor hunting writers in the country, and very, very respected. A long time ago, probably 2010. He's like, Jay, there's people that will come and go, and they'll be flashing the pans. They'll be entertainers. They'll be trying to be fancy. And, he said, but if you can educate and you can inform, you'll be around for a long, long time. So I've really tried to take that to heart. There's probably not a day that goes by that I don't get an email or an Instagram message from someone saying, hey, I listened to your podcast religiously. You helped me kill this Coues deer. If I wouldn't have listened, I wouldn't have had the success that I had. Or, hey, Jay, you shortened the learning curve on my elk hunt. I was successful on my first hunt. I listened to those 15 guests that you had on talking about elk hunting before the hunts, and I wouldn't have gotten this elk without you. That's how I judge the success of what I do. Not by the sheer numbers. I would rather have, 100 people send me a message saying how much, success they've had because of what they've learned, rather than, 10,000 people that listen and never send me a response or, hey, I learned this from you.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's a great take on it.
It's not to say that we all want to,
grow. You want to grow your show.
You want to grow and have a popular thing, but that if that's the focus, I feel like you'll fall short.
Yeah, love that. Perfect. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, growth, and we're always trying to obviously, grow the show. We have sponsors on, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's really about, when I go into an episode, it's what am I curious about? I would never do an episode that I wasn't curious myself. So I think that's always a good way to start out for anybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anybody. So good. Let's talk just quickly about your tech, because I know you started out with maybe things differently at the beginning. But what does it look like? So you do these episodes. Are you doing this mostly in kind of a studio setting, or are you mixing up doing some stuff outdoors?
So yeah, mostly some wherever I'm at. I'm constantly traveling around. Our home base is in Arizona, but I'm gone most all of the year, chasing hunting and fishing destinations. And so a lot of it is just wherever I'm at in my living room, or sometimes my wife locks me in a room and shuts the door, and off I go. And I laugh half the episodes I may be in my boxer shorts.
Yep.
It's very, very informal, and it's just talking about things that we love is easy to do. And I've always tried to kind of have that informal way and not get too fancy. And I think that resonates with people, being genuine and being able to be real and talk specifics. But yeah, I mean, the beauty of podcasting is like this. This morning, may go fishing later today, but you can do it on your own schedule, and you get an hour or so set aside and can have a conversation anywhere.
You mentioned when you're talking about, I love your take on it too, about doing the show and why you do it. I'm curious because it seems like the scoring system, this is kind of turning the table a little bit, but size of animals, I don't quite understand how all that works. And that's an interesting thing too, because, it's kind of weird, right? You go for the biggest animal or the biggest bull, but some people just want to get some meat. First describe the scoring system. Is that a very technical thing to understand?
Well, before I answer that, let me, as an outfitter over the years, it's very important to me, and it's same with fishing. How many times have you gone down a river and had a great day and just, unbelievable fishing, and let's say unbelievable catching, and, you've caught, you've floated down and you've just caught the fire out of them, and it's just been incredible, and, caught, let's say 25, 30 fish. You're not counting, but, you're just catching them. And, they're 16 to 18 inches, and it's just been phenomenal. And then you get to the ramp, and there's some guy over there going, "Oh, I caught 8 fish over 24," right, and blah 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 blah. Yeah. It's like, so one of the reasons that I'm so adamant about being accurate with field judging, and I talk about it so much on my podcast and talk about it on my Instagram, is to be accurate and to be credible, so that if you're hunting and you say, "Hey, I saw a 300-inch elk or a 350-inch elk," I try and provide a lot of the information so that people can be accurate with their buddies, and be able to talk and say, "Man, I saw a great bull. He looked like he was like 330 inches." And for that area, that might be a giant bull. And sometimes I've taken some criticism for someone that is basically putting a precedence of what something scores over the experience, over the quality of hunt. I do it more from a standpoint of trying to help people learn what they're looking at, because as you progress as a hunter, sometimes you shoot 4 or 5 bucks, and then you're like, "Well, I'd like to get a little bit bigger one," or "I'd like to shoot another animal that's a little bit bigger." And so what am I looking at, and why does that one score more than the other? So, whether it's bighorn sheep or Coues deer or elk, I just want people to be able to take into the field some strategies of how to break down and categorize these animals, so that when they're talking to their buddies, they can be as informative as possible as to, I saw several 5 points, I saw some 6-point bulls. Well, how big a bulls? Well, I saw one that was probably in the 300-inch class, one that was in the 320-inch class, and one that was in the 350-inch class. And then, and I get a lot of great positive feedback from people that watch my stuff on Instagram or listen to the podcast, in that they're able to then discuss with their buddies, and have a good conversation about what they saw, and they're saying, well, I really want a bull over 330 inches. Well, Jay says that, we need this, we need this, we need this for a bull to be that big. That's the feedback that I love getting, how people have been able to, I shot my personal best bull, and, he's 325 inches. Thank you, for pointing out that if points look straight, they're normally shorter than the ones that actually have curve. If they have curve, that means inches, or spacing between the points on the main beam. If your points are stacked on the main beam closer, that usually means that your main beams are shorter. So you want to look for those points, or the distance between the points spaced out. And then a lot of the anatomical features of, from the tip of an elk's nose to the burr of the antler is, 16 inches, or, whatever it may be. They can take those into the field and actually be able to speak intelligently about what they're seeing.
And then that inch spacing, what is the 320 is the inches between, where is that on the elk?
The elk obviously have two antlers, and each main beam is scored, and it's scored on the outer edge of the main beam. What I try and point out is, the first and second points generally come out of the antler pretty close to each other, but then you want from that second point going up the main beam to where the third point comes out, you want to see some space there. And then between the third and fourth, you want to see some space there. And people ask me, well, how much space? Well, I can't necessarily tell you space, but I can show you on my Instagram a picture and say, look how this bull, when you look from the side angle, look how on the beam itself, the points, there's not very much space between. But look at this other bull, how all of a sudden there's, 4, 5, 6 inches more between points than the other. Well, what that's going to translate to is your main beam is actually going to be longer. Well, what does the main beam longer have anything to do? Well, a longer main beam, you're going to get more inches. So, guys that are not interested in scoring or inches, it's fine. You can just fast forward and not pay attention. But people really want to, whether it be mule deer or Coues deer or antelope or bighorn sheep or elk, it seems, especially in the West, that people, well, I shouldn't say that, the Midwest guys, they talk about their bucks and, how big, it's a 6-pointer, an 8-pointer, a 10-pointer, a 12-pointer. But then they're talking about, the main beams are 24, or the main beams are 26, or the main beams are 18. It's go back to the fishing analogy. I mean, it's just like, when you have buddies, you know people that when they tell you they caught a 22-inch brown trout, well, that particular person, it's probably an 18-inch brown trout. Then there's people that when they say they caught a 22-inch brown trout, it's a 22-inch brown trout. It's trying to be accurate and not, have Pinocchio nose.
And if you take that 320, so break down where those come from. Where on the, like, if you just measure, what is 320 inches?
Okay, so for scoring on a bull elk, you basically score each one of the points. So your first point, your second point, your third point, your fourth point, and your fifth point. Normally a bull elk has a 6x6 frame, but they have 5 points, and then the tip of the main beam is what people often refer to as a sixth point, yeah. Right? Then you have your main beam length. So each beam, generally, for good rule of thumb, those are each 50 inches. Then you have your spread credit. Spread credit goes from the inside of the main beam to the other inside of the main beam in a perpendicular line. So you don't hold your tape at an angle; it's straight across. And then you have your mass measurements. Your mass measurements are between the G1 and the G2, which is G1 is the first point and the second point. So you're between your first and second point. your second and third point, your third and fourth point, and your fourth and fifth point. So you have 4 mass measurements per side. And so that's what makes up a score. So you have points, main beam, mass, and spread. And that's where you get, your 280, your 300, your 320, whatever all of those total up to, that's what comes up. So for instance, say you have 150 inches on one antler, 150 inches when you add up the points, the main beam, and the mass. And then all you have to do then is add in your spread. Let's say the bull is 36 inches from inside to inside. So you'd have 150, that's 300, and then 36 inches. So it'd be a 336 inch bull.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's definitely detailed. So similar to, you measure a fish, there's some calculations, formulas.
Exactly. Like the tarpon fishermen, that for the records, in some of these tournaments, they measure the length, they measure the girth, and then they times it by a formula, and that's what they get. And that's how they judge a lot of these, like the holly or golden fly or the, all the tarpon tournaments.
Oh, the tarpon. Yeah. Tournaments for sure.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we're going to get out here pretty quick. I want to touch gear as always. I'm always kind of interested in the gear, right? Because then I'm sure you have a lot of different gear you use. When you think about it, we've been talking a little bit about elk today, but what are some of the items that are kind of must have? You're out there in the field. I'm not sure. Are you can talk binoculars, tripods, kind of your rifle. Give us a little.
For elk hunting specifically?
Yeah, let's talk elk hunting.
Well, for me, I like to have a good pair of binoculars. So I always have a 10 power pair of binoculars around my neck. I like Swarovski optics. They're made in Austria. Phenomenal binoculars. Usually have a pair of 10 power binocular around my neck. Now they're making them with rangefinder capability within the rangefinder, so you can shoot your yardage. Then I also like to have in my backpack, I like to have a good pair of, say, 15 power binoculars, especially if I'm hunting in areas where I can sit down and look across a canyon, look across a valley, and look a long ways.
So not a spotting scope.
Well, and then I also have a spotting scope as well. If I'm hunting the thicker timber, a lot of times I'm just carrying my 10 power binoculars around my neck and I don't carry a spotting scope. But, the spotting scopes, I like the 95 millimeters Swarovski 30 to 70 eyepiece, the STX. That's phenomenal. That's what I use for my elk and my mule deer and coues and my bighorn sheep, all of my long range stuff. And then it's great these days on our cell phones. Now there's a thing called phone scope where you can basically have this adapter on your phone and put it up to the lens of the spotting scope or your binocular and take videos right on your iPhone. And a lot of the stuff on my Instagram account is, you'll see using a phone scope adapter, really easy to use, but then you can capture what you're looking at and then, break down and be like, okay, I've been scouting here for, 15 days and, here's the 27 bull elk that I've seen or whatever it may be. And, look through and be able to categorize. And I think that's hugely important to be able to kind of keep track and record of not only in your mind, but have video or pictures of what you've seen. And all of my hunts, I take a ton of video and I, kind of analyze bucks or bulls or rams or whatever it is. I always seem to have trekking poles. The older I get, the more important trekking poles are for stability, especially when going downhill or side hilling. When I was, when we were all 20 years old, we didn't need them. But the old, I'm 49. Being able to be stable in the mountains, I feel using trekking poles, is a lot less wear and tear on my knees and, on my body. And then a good lightweight backpack, something that you can carry a lot of gear. It's comfortable. It fits you well. I use a Coues backpack. Mm-hmm. And then, gear, as fishermen, as sportsmen, fishermen and hunters, over the last, I would say 15 years, the amount of quality technical gear is just, it's mind blowing. And as a consumer, it's so awesome to be able to have, phenomenal fly rods and reels and lines and, all the technology, as well as with hunting. You've got all of the clothing and gear that's going to keep you warmer, going to keep you drier, going to allow, moisture to wick away from your skin and keep you focused. And the less you can worry about some of that stuff, the longer you can go, the harder you can go. And so that's super important. I use a lot of the Coues gear for my clothing, rain gear, etc., and staying warm. The down technology, the super down, they're now making down products, the water repellent that they're making, where if down gets wet, that it still
That's crazy.
Insulates, which is awesome. And then a good pair of boots. I usually rotate several boots, throughout the season and actually day to day, depending on what I'm doing. But having a really good, sturdy pair of boots with I like a stiff-soled boot. And the older I get, it seems like the better the boots, it's more important. Back when I was 20, you could basically run around in trail running shoes everywhere. But I think as you get older, your joints are not as receptive to, side hilling and all of that and carrying large loads. So it's important to have a good pair of boots.
What do you like for your boots? What brand do you like?
So I like a Schnee's Beartooth. They're out of Montana. I like for lighter stuff like the Asolo Drifters, the Loa Renegades, that kind of boot for maybe just the lighter kind of the turkey hunting, or even not as rigorous mountain. But when I get into the mountains, carrying loads like Dall sheep hunting or elk hunting and steep terrain, the Schnee's Beartooth or the Schnee's Granite. Also like the Coues Rebel K boots for super technical. They're a real lightweight boot, synthetic boot. They dry very quickly. One of the things with a leather boot, sometimes they don't dry very, very quickly. So sometimes a synthetic boot is better in that regard.
Nice. This is good. I love the gear stuff. And on your pack, so when you're packing, you got your rifle and your trek poles. Where's your rifle? Is it just kind of clipped on your shoulder, or how's that look when you got two?
Yeah, so Coues makes a great rifle sling on your backpack. So it's actually attached to the backpack and very easy to get on and off, but it also stays out of your way, especially if you're making a big ascent or descent up to an area to go glassing. It's basically on the side of your pack, but it's real easy to get off. And I really like that. And it's really important sometimes to be able to get to the rifle quickly, especially say if you're hunting, in Alaska where you've got a lot of bears or something. You don't want to have your rifle where you can't get to it quickly, for, protection if you need to fire off a round just to warn, a bear that you're there. But Coues makes a great product, great rifle sling that goes right on the pack.
That's perfect. And this is a kind of another general random one, but so in your rifles is there a bullet in the chamber on safety, or is it not?
No, I very rarely carry a bullet in the chamber. I think it's important to be able to, jack one into the chamber and be ready to go if you need to. But I just think from a general safety standpoint, hiking around and going over logs and, over fences and through brush, carrying a loaded gun is not a good practice. The safety can get kicked off. And, first and foremost, anybody that hunts with me knows safety is number one concern. And, I think carrying a loaded gun is not a good idea. Most of the time, I tell clients, we're not loading a bullet into the chamber until literally right before we're gonna make the shot. Now, with that being said, it's important to be able to load your gun, put a bullet in the chamber, and do it quietly. But I just think it's a good practice to never, have bullets in the magazine, but not have bullet in the chamber.
Not in chamber. Perfect. And let's take it out here. The 222. This will be a quick little rapid fire here, and we'll hop out of here. This is kind of like top tips, tools, and resources, and we probably talked a little bit about this, but let's take it back to elk just to wrap this up. A couple of elk tips. If somebody's going out there, let's say they got their hunt, they're all set up. They're out there. We've passed and they're on the hunt. What do you tell somebody that kind of that day, the day of the hunt?
So I think one of the important things, if you have a right-handed shooter, is that they always understand that, let's say it's during the rut and you're going to be calling elk and the elk are going to be coming into the call, is that if they're a right-handed shooter, that they set up, in other words, if the elk is going to come in at, say, 12 o'clock or, say, 10 o'clock, a little bit to their left, it's important that a right-handed shooter always sets up a little bit, gun barrel pointed a little bit to the right of where the elk is going to come from, because that allows, if the elk swings more to the right, they have the ability to cover all the way back to their left. In other words, if the elk is coming at 12 o'clock and the gun barrel is pointed at 12 o'clock, if that elk moves to the right or moves more to the 2 or 3 o'clock position, that hunter actually has to pick up the rifle and move it across their body the opposite way, whereas you could swing to your left in a much bigger almost like 180 degrees. It's the same for, I tell turkey hunters. So always set up, if you're a right-handed shooter, set up a little bit to the right of where you think the elk is going to come into the sight picture. That way you have the ability that if they continue moving right, you're already in front of them. But if they go back left, you can swing back across the left side of your body with a lot easier movement. That's number one. Number two is, I always tell people that what you see in the videos is, the basic situation, the climax of the hunt where everything comes together, but that every day the hunt is not going to be completely action-packed. Prepare your mind for kind of a grind. Prepare your mind for, sometimes it's going to be slow, sometimes it's going to be a struggle, but that you're ready when things are really happening, that you're engaged and you're into it. But it's not always going to be like that. So I try and set the stage of like being mentally tough and prepared for every situation that's going to come. You're going to get rained on, you're going to get cold, you're going to be physically exerting yourself, and there's going to be challenges along the way, and I try and set that so that they're prepared for what's going to happen. And then another thing is, shot placement. With a rifle, it's very important that you want to basically split that body in half from an up and down. From a vertical standpoint, you want to shoot them about mid body, and you want to shoot them, depending on the range, you want to shoot them, from the midpoint of the shoulder, say back about, 15 inches. So that you've got, the heart and the lungs there, and to make a good, center mass body shot right behind the shoulder from, the center point of the shoulder back about 15 inches is kind of the sweet spot there. And that they need to focus as an elk is coming in. Once they determine, okay, if the guide or if they're on their own and they know that that's an elk they want to shoot, then they want to really narrow in and focus on the crease of that shoulder and putting that bullet in the right spot.
Mm-hmm. And when it's moving on you, say, are you, say you got your client.
I always try and talk my clients into not taking a moving shot. A moving shot, no matter what the distance, is always a challenge. Always try and wait for that animal to stand. It's our job as hunters to make as ethically clean a kill as possible. So a moving shot is always a challenge. I like a standing still animal, and I like to be able to, put the bullet exactly where it needs to go. I always like people to be as calm as possible. I like to, help them breathe. If I'm guiding someone, just tell them, listen, nothing's going to happen fast. We're going to be in total control here. If it doesn't feel right, we're not going to pull the trigger. Our job as a hunter is, to make a clean, ethical, quick kill. And, I would rather than you rush a shot or take something that you're not comfortable with, or you're just too excited, let's just not shoot at all. And let's get in another situation. And, part of my job as a guide is to try and keep people calm and help them to perform the best that they possibly can.
So yeah, the breathing, that's a big part of it. And I'm just thinking again, as I start to think of my kids, right, eventually getting them into it and teaching them, I struggle with some of that stuff early on, the breathing, the shooting. What is that on the breath? Do you recommend, is it like a deep breath and let out, exhale completely or exhale partly? How big of a issue?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about the actual shot, but I think even more importantly than that is throughout the whole process, breathing and taking, 4 or 5, 6 big deep breaths and trying to just relax. The most important thing when you're taking kids or anybody that's hunting, I mean, I've seen some of the most experienced hunters, maybe it's their final sheep of the Grand Slam and they're just excited, and I get the same way. You almost have to step in and just say, all right, let's calm down. Let's take some deep breaths. Let's put the crosshairs where you want it. Maybe even not have a bullet in the chamber, maybe even dry fire and just squeeze the trigger. Okay, now let's put a bullet in. A lot of times that will help people. I've had guys where they're, about to shoot the biggest buck of their life, and I'll say, don't even load one in. Let's just dry fire on it.
Oh,
so
wow.
Let's load, and squeeze it. And so I said, put it right where you, put the crosshairs right where you, okay, now breathe. Okay, now squeeze. And then the next thing I'll say, okay, let's load one in and do the same thing. A lot of times that's a great bit of advice for people is to, don't do anything fast. If you're shaking, if you're excited, if you're breathing, just, you're shaking and, excited, just lay there a second, calm down, take a bunch of deep breaths, and then focus. Focusing is getting your mind right is hugely important. And a lot of times, sometimes it takes someone to say, all right, let's calm down. Let's retrace our steps here. Let's go through our process. And then that all of a sudden puts them back at the range where they're just, shooting at a target and everything is calm. And the calmer that you can be, the better, most of the time, the better executed shots you can make.
Wow, that's awesome advice. And something, if you haven't done that, seems like that would be a challenge to, you're on an animal and to actually dry fire, that's with all the excitement. But I love that advice.
I mean, it's no different than like, a giant redfish or a giant tarpon or, a fish of a lifetime or even a big brown trout, 25-inch brown trout is feeding on dries and you got one shot. You almost have to just be like, okay, just calm down. You've done this a million times. Let's just make it happen. Put it on them.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and you have those people, some people that are, well, wrongly on the on the fishing is that, you just go up there and you start casting, but really it's like you have one cast to make. You make that one, make it as perfect as you can get it right there, and that's your shot at that amazing fish.
Exactly. When I was in New Zealand, I learned that firsthand. Like, you walk for half a mile or 3/4 mile until you find a fish, and then you find a fish, and it's like he's in a really tough spot, Jay. You're going to have to make the perfect cast. So you just have to say, you could just totally melt and shaking and like, here's a 30-inch brown that you dreamed about your whole life. Or you can just go, I've done this a million times, breathe, take a couple deep breaths, make a great presentation, throw it right in there and, set the hook on them.
Nice. Well, you keep bringing up more questions as you're talking here, and I'll maybe hold some of these maybe for a later point. But so we're on the tips, tools, and techniques, and you've talked about some tools. You want to throw one more out there for elk?
I think elk hunting, if you're talking about hunting during the peak of the rut, most everyone kind of gravitates towards elk hunting and they want to call elk. I think one of the most important things about calling elk is trying to be as realistic as you possibly can with your cadence, with your tone, and with your sound. And I think the more practice you can do and the more confidence that you can gain with your elk calling, the better off you'll be. But also, the more at-bats that you can have and the more time you can spend interacting with the animals through trial and error is going to make you better. So don't be afraid to take your shot as far as calling to those elk. Don't be afraid to, if you know that you've practiced, you know that you sound good, you know that your cadence and tonal quality is good, interact with those animals and then play off of them. And, as it's going, you'll learn what works really well and what doesn't work as well. But you've got to get to the plate and you've got to take your chances and go for it and get in the game and enjoy it.
Are there people out there that are hunting? I mean, what percentage of people do you think are not doing any? They're just hunting elk without doing any calling versus people calling?
I think during the rut, everyone likes to have an elk call. I think there's people that just pull out, buy a brand new call 3 days before they go and blow a couple times and think they're good. And then there's people that practice all year. And then there's, people that practice a couple of months ahead of time. I don't know what the right formula is because it's different for everybody. But do you have a big fly fishing trip planned and you don't cast or anything leading up, you just go and wing it? Or do you go out in the backyard or go to a local pond and, just work on your form and work on your technique? And, everyone has a different level of, how much they want to prepare. But I think in general, there's a lot of elk hunters that, really practice. And then there's a whole segment that, don't practice and they wonder why they don't have the success that others do.
And the final one here is on just resources. You mentioned a few, but for elk, what's another good resource if somebody wanted to dig more into what we're talking about, just elk hunting and in general and some of these topics?
Well, I think not to plug my own stuff, but obviously my podcast, Elk Hunting, my Instagram, I have a lot of elk bugling, a lot of cow calling sequences, a lot of field judging and scoring. I mentioned Roe hunting resources. I mentioned GoHunt.com. There's a lot of cool publications out there, magazines that you can get and read articles from guys. And then sometimes there's nothing that beats going into YouTube and just typing in elk hunting or bugling elk or elk calling. And it's amazing these days with the resources we have, YouTube and Google being one of them, in that you can just go and watch elk videos after elk videos after elk videos on YouTube and hear, good stuff, bad stuff. I mean, but there's a lot of quality stuff out there. And, listening to elk themselves and hearing their cadence and their tonal quality and their volume and, the repetition and how they do it is huge. So, I mean, YouTube is a fantastic resource.
All right, Jay. Well, we'll send everybody out to jscottoutdoors.com or jscottoutdoors on Instagram. And, I guess, this has been great for me. I think we've kind of kept it high level, which is good. And I appreciate you spending all the time today and hope to keep in touch with you moving forward.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on your podcast and thinking of me. And I listened to an episode you did with Andy Mill. Andy's a dear friend of mine.
Oh, cool.
He's a dear friend of mine. Him and his son, Nicky, are fantastic. I spend the summer near them here in Aspen, Colorado, and fish with them a lot, and they're really, really good, amazing casters and fishermen. I started listening to the Mike Lawson podcast. You're doing a great job, and keep it up. It's a lot of fun to hear the passion that you have for it,
right
and just I want to encourage everyone out there, to don't wait to chase some of those things, whether it be elk or different animals or a fishing place you want to go. I mean, we're all getting older by the day, and there's all the excuses in the world to not go red fishing or black drum fishing or brown trout fishing or, hunting elk or Coues or whatever it may be. If there's something out there, make it happen. I feel like so many people make excuses to not go on that trip of a lifetime, and ultimately, we need to make time and sacrifice and make a good discipline to be able to pursue the animals and the adventures and the experiences that we're looking for. So, don't wait, go out there and get it.
Love it. Love it, Jay. All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, buddy.
So there it is. That's a big one. Elk Hunting 101. We are slowly expanding. We're going to be touching on a few subjects in hunting and fishing and some other subjects as we go. If you have a topic, whether fly fishing or outdoor related, I'd love to hear from you. Dave@wetflyswing.com. And I will try to put together an episode, or if you have a guest, maybe there's another podcast you listen to that you love in the outdoor space, I would love to connect with another podcaster that you love as well. We got some good stuff going here as we move in through the summer and start to look at, eventually at a new year coming up. We've got some big stuff coming for you, and this is just priming the pump right now. We're priming it right now. We're getting it ready to roll, and we're going to have another big year as we approach 2023. I'm excited to be on this journey with you, and I hope that you can connect with me and share your story. If you haven't talked to me yet, please reach out. Let me know if you've listened to this episode. If you liked this hunting episode, this is a hunting. We haven't done too many. In fact, this might be maybe the second one in all the years we've been doing this. So I'd love to hear from you. If you really enjoyed this episode, you want to hear more hunting episodes, specifically, reach out to me, Dave@wetflyswing, or on social media, wetflyswing, and let me know. Just say, hey, I listened to the Jay Scott episode and I liked it. Or maybe you didn't like it. You can let me know either way, and I'm gonna keep doubling down. So let's do this. I'm gonna get out of here and get on with the next one. Appreciate you supporting this podcast and all the listens, whether you're just beginning or if you've been listening to many episodes. I definitely appreciate every single one. All right. I hope you have a good evening, a good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And I hope to maybe see you online or catch you on the water or in the backcountry.